Just made it past the scariest part of the presentation. I didn't trip on the stairs. I think we can all agree that I probably drew the worst speaking slot of this whole conference, going right after Janita. Hopefully, the only saving grace is maybe you had a lot of champagne at breakfast and maybe some beer at lunch, which will make my presentation a lot more interesting. But first of all, I want to thank GoaFest for having me, and particularly to Jaideep for inviting me to be one of the speakers here. I've really spent the last 20 years of my life working at the same company, which is RGA. And when I started, it was about 50 people, and we've grown to about 2,200 with offices all over the world. And this is by far the favorite part of my job, which is getting to travel around the world and meet with people who work in the industry, meet clients, other colleagues, et cetera. And along the way, I think over the last few years, I've been seeing some patterns emerging, and that's really what I wanted to talk about today. And they're affecting our industry in very powerful ways, and I think all of them demand a response. So there's two overarching trends from my perspective that are driving our industry right now, and they seem to be the things that everyone's talking about. In 2017, everywhere I went in the world, every client I talked to, they were all talking about the same thing, and it was this word, disruption. Disruption. Suddenly everybody was talking about how their company or their brand was being disrupted, the agency business is being disrupted, suddenly all these new competitors are coming on the scene that are many times our size, that we have no way of competing against, et cetera. Now last year, there was another overused word. Can anyone guess what the most overused word of 2018 was? What was that? Insight. It's actually in my title. It's the word transformation. Suddenly everyone started talking about transformation. Obviously this makes perfect sense. If you're being disrupted, it probably means that you need to make some changes. And so we've seen this word being used over and over again. Everyone's talking about this. Recently, WPP, which is the largest holding company in our industry, rebranded itself as being standing for creative transformation. And so suddenly everybody's talking about transformation. I actually think this is a good word. I find it inspiring. It's a rallying cry to make very much needed changes in our industry. And to me, it really represents a creative revolution, which is what I really want to talk about today. It's really opening the aperture of our creative lenses so that we see the world much more broadly than we used to in the past. And I think what you're going to see in my presentation is that not every brief can be solved with a story, through storytelling. Not everything is a piece of content being waited to be delivered in media. And this is particularly true as brands grapple with how they're going to connect with the new generation of customers. So let's see if we can find some answers together. So this is the biggest trend that's affecting my company right now. Our clients, by and large, are not doing very well. And this is pretty remarkable because we're not in a recession. This is not a time of economic turmoil. The economy is actually rather strong in America. These are our clients in New York. We have different ones around the world. I think as you look at this list, you would recognize most of these brands. They're mostly big, huge Fortune 500 companies, and by and large, they predated the digital revolution. If I just take maybe the bottom row and a half out, you can see that these are companies that have been around since way before the internet and way before digital revolution. In 2017, more than half of them shrunk. That's a pretty remarkable statistic. I think the average size of the decline was something like 8%, which is not a sustainable number in any industry to be declining at that type of a pace. So I guess what's happening? What are we seeing that's driving this? I think everyone would agree that technology came along and disrupted everything. It changed all of our lives forever in a multitude of different ways, from the products and services we use, the way that we shop, the media that we consume, et cetera. But I think it actually did something else which is even more powerful. Is that it opened the door to a new crop of competitors that look like nothing like the competition of the past. And we call these asymmetrical competitors. If you're a big company like Walmart, that's used to competing against other brick and mortar retailer, having to grapple with Amazon is an example of asymmetrical competition. If you're General Motors and suddenly a company like Tesla comes along, that's another example of asymmetrical competition. And we've seen the rise of this all around the world of what we're calling these disruptive innovators, companies that were born digital, across multiple industries, multiple formats, from multiple levels. You have some that are massive size, they have over 1 billion customers or users, all the way down to ones that might be in the single digit of millions, that are wreaking havoc on their respective industries, having an outsized effect on more traditional brands. It's happening in every single category. This is a list from the US of what are called the unicorns of Silicon Valley. They're all the companies that are valued at over $1 billion or more. Some of them have only been around for less than 10 years. We could make a similar chart, of course, for India. I don't know your economy quite as well, of course, but obviously this is happening in multiple markets. And if I had to show you one slide that really summarizes what's happening in the industry right now, it's this next one, if I can get the clicker to work. In the center there, those are all the brands of Procter & Gamble. Now, historically, P&G was the world's largest advertiser. At their peak, they spent about $7 billion a year on ads. So you can see that they are a huge driver of our industry, and a lot of them are clients of, a lot of these brands are clients of our different agencies. Around the outside are all of these companies that have arisen in less than 10 years that are going head-to-head against P&G. They're all born digital, they're direct-to-consumer. They just start selling their products directly to consumers online. They've captured the hearts and minds of young consumers. And in this dynamic, I think P&G decided that advertising was not the solution, and they started to cut billions of dollars from their budget. It's probably the one main reason why Sir Martin Sorrell, who was the most powerful man in advertising 2 years ago, is no longer running the company that he founded, because WPP, and all the holding companies for that matter, did not have an adequate response for how to grapple with the challenges that companies like P&G were facing from the disruptive innovators. And so about 2 years ago, you started to see all these CEOs of huge companies talking the language of disruption, and all of them were asking the same question: how do we go from potentially being disrupted to actually becoming the disruptor? And by and large, our industry hasn't had a response to that. For us, everything was a brief to make a new ad. Now, the same dynamic that was affecting the clients, creating the opening for these disruptive innovators, was causing a second problem, and that is the decline of advertising, the power of advertising as we know it. I would say that disruptive innovation has not been kind to our industry. And in many of our markets, across many of our clients, the big elephant in the room that no one is really addressing is that the audiences for ad-supported media seems to be shrinking quite fast. The most effective media channels for advertising like television are the ones that are probably facing it the most, but it's particularly true among young audiences. It's very difficult in the US, for instance, to reach a young audience with a message about a brand through traditional media like television. You see these kinds of charts, all these studies where the decline is actually pretty dramatic. This is from 2011 to 2017. Companies like Netflix believe their next 100 million customers are going to come from India. And so we see this problem happening all over the world. Last year in the US, we reached a low point. 44% of time that consumers spend in media was in places that were ad-supported. And of course, the number is a lot lower as we look at things like Gen Z and millennial generation. I would say that Rashad, who's a friend of mine, is probably the smartest man in advertising. He's the Chief Strategy Officer of Publicis Group, and he was published a few months back predicting that the advertising industry was going to continue to decline for the next 5 years. Pretty dramatic drop of about 30%, credited to the same exact phenomenon, the rise of the disruptive innovators and these direct-to-consumer business models. So what are we supposed to do? I think the answer is that all around us, is that we really need to embrace change and view this as a moment for a new creative revolution. I agree 100% with Gordon's presentation this morning, where he basically said that data is not going to replace creativity. I agree 100% with that. I think creativity is still the driver of growth, but I think we really need to expand the aperture of what we consider to be creativity and not believe that every brief requires a piece of content or storytelling. So our clients, many of them are old economies. I just shared some of them are new economy. And I think we see this mandate for change across all of them. They're all raising their hands and saying that the business as usual is dead. They're looking for new ways of doing things that are going to help move them forward. And I think the other key point in all of this is that it has to be done fast. In many of our markets, we don't have a lot of time to make these changes. Our clients are looking to make them right now, and if we're not there to be the one that can help drive the change for them, they're going to go looking for other solutions, and there's a lot of alternatives right now. We just talked in one of the sessions earlier today about, for instance, Accenture's acquisition of Droga5. So there's a lot of players out there, there's a lot of new forms of competition, and we've got to figure out how to do this quickly. So this really became RGA's rallying cry last year. We decided we were going to base the entire company on transformation, and we were going to prove to clients that we could do it fast. And this became our entire mission. We reorganized. We've been actually on this path for quite a number of years, but we finally did all the final reorganization that was needed to enable us to deliver transformation at speed. Now, when we think about transformation, we think of it in 3 different buckets. Depends on the stage that clients are at. On the one side is what we call business transformation. These are companies that are looking for a new vision for the future. In the middle, we're calling experience transformation. How do you turn this vision into new products, services, and experiences? And lastly, we talk about marketing transformation. How do you connect audiences to brands nowadays? What is this new modern form of brand building? So I'm going to show examples from each one. I think what you'll see in this work is that none of them are storytelling. None of them involve us creating a piece of content, for instance. All of them were aimed at young audiences. How are we going to connect with young audiences? All of them were done for more traditional brands that have been around since before the digital revolution. So let's start with business transformation. We talked about this as really helping companies find a new strategic vision for the future. The example I want to share is from Brazil. One of our clients is Bradesco. It's the second largest bank in Brazil. And in Brazil, banks are facing a unique challenge that is probably a little bit endemic to Brazil, but it also seems to be a problem that's emerging in other parts of the world. And it's basically that young consumers just don't want to embrace banks. This is a rather remarkable statistic from a Viacom study, no less, done in Brazil, that young Brazilians would rather go to the dentist than to have to go to a bank. And so what Bradesco was finding is that they just weren't signing up for banking services at the same pace of prior generations. And I think the main reason is that banks have never really been all that responsive to their needs. And as consumers have gotten more choice, it's caught up with them. Banks make money whether or not we as consumers achieve our financial goals. In fact, they make more money often when we don't, when we find ourselves slipping behind. And this is obviously doubly true when you're young and you don't have a lot of money, and you're living from paycheck to paycheck, and occasionally you go into debt. So what does it look like to try to solve this problem? How do you build not a digital bank, but a bank for digital natives? This is something called Next Bank that launched in 2017 that was almost entirely created by RGA. So this is bringing all of those apertures, business transformation, experience transformation, marketing transformation, under one roof with one client. I think that's a great example of a business problem that can't be solved with a piece of storytelling or piece of narrative. It actually involved us having to invent an entirely new bank, and the results have been amazing. This is one of the most looked at case studies by the banking industry around the world because we figured out a way to win over new customers, young consumers that previously had stayed away from banks. Moving on to experience transformation. So again, the definition of this for us is that you've got a strategic vision for the future, but you don't know how to turn it into amazing new products, services, experiences, et cetera, that deliver on the vision. And the one example I wanted to show is from our oldest client, which is Nike. And in this example, it was done for the Jordan brand. And we managed to sell an entire line of shoes in 23 minutes, delivered door to door in under 2 hours. So in 2018, about a year ago, Nike was the sponsor of the NBA All-Star Game, which is one of the big sports events in America. The reason why they did it is it was the 30th anniversary of an iconic moment in the brand's history. At the All-Star Game in 1988, Michael Jordan won the slam dunk competition by leaping from the free throw line and making a dunk. And so they wanted to celebrate this iconic moment from the brand's history 30 years later. And of course, they wanted to sell a new model of shoes. So this is the Tinker 3, which was launching in concert with this sponsorship. So the brief to RGA was to leverage this expensive sponsorship, really celebrate this iconic moment. But we wanted to sell the merchandise. We actually wanted to turn the sponsorship in a way to sell stuff. And we wanted to blow people's minds. We wanted people at the game who bought the shoes to actually get the shoes by the time they got home from the event. And so all of this involved a number of partners coming together to create what we called AR Jordan.
And Michael is backing all the way to the middle of the backcourt.
Creativity and imagination is the key.
At a time when consumers are avoiding advertising and trying to stay away from it as much as possible. So the starting point here is companies got a great vision, got amazing products, but how do they tell that story to more people and turn them into long-term fans and members without necessarily having to rely on media? So we believe that marketing transformation is really driven by two pillars, engagement and sharing. To us, these are the pillars of modern brand building. All of our work starts with how are we going to engage an audience and how are we going to get them to share stuff. And this example comes from Samsung, which is our largest client. And here we're dealing with a product that just a couple of years ago was the butt of jokes all over the world. This is the Note line of Samsung. The Note 7, I believe it was, had this little problem with the batteries catching on fire. And every time you got on a flight, you were reminded of the fact that you were not allowed to bring this device on the flight because of the fact that it could start a fire on an airplane. So now we're launching the Note 9, and we're at a point where there's a lot of decline in uptake of new mobile phones. And here we had to figure out a way to sell something that necessarily was not on the radar of an audience that was looking to buy a new phone. So here it's a great example of how to use engagement and sharing as a pillar of brand building, but also how to sell devices and how to engage a new audience that wasn't even in the market for a Note phone.
How do you turn a phone known for this
I can draw and take notes.
into the phone for gaming?
Samsung
Galaxy
Note 9
is the one that everyone's talking about.
You don't make a campaign, you make a character and drop it into the world's biggest game. Introducing the Galaxy Skin.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Galaxy Skin.
The most hyped skin in Fortnite right now.
Looks unreal.
The rarest skin ever.
Only way to unlock it is to purchase the Galaxy Note 9.
To build hype, we gave the skin to one gamer before anyone else.
Ninja.
The world's biggest gamer unboxed the Note 9 in front of 20 million viewers. And then he jumped on Twitch, where 21 million fans watched him dominate live.
This is the best skin in the game, facts.
Gamers lost their
What? Dude, that looks so effing cool.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Oh! Galaxy
They had to have the Galaxy Skin, even if it meant stealing it from demo phones and retail stores.
I'm at the mall and I'm going to be attempting to go and get the skin.
Here we go. It's loading, boys.
All this way to get the Galaxy Skin.
We just wasted 2 hours and get the skin.
This cyber shoplifting happened everywhere. Gamers traded tips on Reddit, and the black market opened up. Yeah, that's $7,000 for a skin that came free on a $900 phone. The Galaxy Skin went beyond the game. Fans made action figures, fashion lines, and even makeup tutorials. Gamers couldn't stop talking about Galaxy. But most importantly, we saw an increase in Galaxy Note 9 sales of 243%. And got fans of our competitors in-store and hands-on with a Note 9. That's how you turn a phone for productivity geeks into the phone for gamers.
All right, so a new creative revolution, disruptions are our starting point, transformations are our rallying cry, business transformation, experience transformation, marketing transformation are what we're selling nowadays. 3 different examples, 3 different clients, all of them pre-digital, all of them grappling with all of the challenges of modern brand building and how to deal with these types of business problems. And 3 different examples of work, all of which are not rooted in storytelling. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you very much.